the Indianness of many British Indian MPs that a lot of Indians lay some sentimental claim to usually exists more in the minds of those doing the claiming than in the minds and the lives of those so claimed. These MPs are Indian only in the broadest sense of the term, to the extent that they look Indian, have Indian names, and also to an extent culturally Indian ways. But all that is well short of any political connections, never mind a loyalty. Indians do need to think twice, and actually twice, about claiming some of these MPs, as people are rather fond of doing. First, they are British, their commitments are to Britain and not to India, and why not? They are British citizens after all. And secondly, many of them and their families came to Britain from East Africa, mainly Kenya and Uganda. That makes them now twice removed from India. And that difference between East African Indians and Indians from India shows, and not just among the MPs. Many in Britain, straight from India, do speak sometimes of a subdued sub-racism from East African Indians. In East Africa, they took a midway position between colonizers and the colonized, which placed them, they believe, a little closer to the British than did Indians from India feel. And of course, that seems to lead to assumptions and to some attitudes. And most spectacularly, this disconnect that we see between Indian origins and Indian origins via East Africa, so to speak, was very much to the fore in the claims and the connections that Rishi Sunak made and did not about his Indianness. He drew his connections back to Kenya, the family's connections back to Kenya, and stopped there. Rishi Sunak spoke often and in fact invariably through the hustings of his family, his parents having migrated from Kenya to Britain, got shelter here, got the good life, got opportunities, and they made it good. And he spoke of this as an instance of Britain opening its doors legally to those with talent and who then go on to do well in Britain. But the family was not exactly poor and suffering. It was a very prosperous family. They could afford education in Britain. The father, a doctor who then became a GP here. Mother here did not just work in a pharmacy, she owned it. And by today's terms, that family would have an income of upwards of £250,000 a year. Certainly not a poor and suffering family. They were already prosperous in East Africa. They simply chose another location, another destination. They of course did well, but this was not a flight as if from a country where people need to go to Britain to seek refuge and to seek support and a getaway from dire living conditions. Suella Braverman, again, the family came from Kenya and a fairly reasonably off middle class family. The father worked in a housing association, mother in the health service. The family came here, they got jobs, they got into business. The mother got into politics in the Conservative Party and contested elections twice. The family settled down quite well here, but not again from any penury in Kenya. The family was reasonably well off and then moved to Britain. And this again is typical of a pattern of people and families doing rather well in East Africa, Kenya particularly, who then moved to find base in Britain. Priti Patel's family moved to Britain from Uganda next door to Kenya, but not through any distress through the Idi Amin expulsions or any other upheaval of that kind. The family moved in the early 60s. They were a middle-class family in Uganda. Then they moved to Britain and set up some small businesses. The father got into politics. Priti Patel followed, and clearly their politics was the Brexit politics to break Britain away from the European Union, which of course is an agenda that she followed very actively and very successfully, as it turned out. But this was a move into politics that arose from life here. There was no move to Britain as a result of any distress or any deprivation in Uganda.